Welcome to the Top 1% Recruiters. Attention, hiring managers. I'm giving you a warning here. You may not want to watch this episode because we're going to be talking about you. We're going to be letting you in on a little secret here. Hiring managers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I know it sounds a little passive aggressive, and I could have done a word play here and gone with the good and the average and the ugly. But really, I'm basing this off of the 80-20% principle that says that 20% of an organization is successful because of the people at that level, the top 20% level, in which they are go-getters and achievers, and they have an outstanding reputation to execute. And then you have the 80% that are kind of the followers. So they follow suit, and they might be some above average or even below average type of employees that are part of an organization. But the truth is that there are some really good hiring managers out there. There's actually even some great ones. So we want to definitely highlight and talk about those, but we also want to focus on the challenges and why a hiring manager could be classified as bad or ugly in that context. And when you think about it, a manager becomes a hiring manager whenever there is a recruiting need. That means they have to make a hire to the organization, to the company, to their team. And so they're elevated to the status of hiring manager. And the reality is it's a temporary job title that they have until they fill the job. And you would think that if they have a job title called the hiring manager, that they would focus on the number one thing that's in their job title, which is hiring, to make hires. And you would think that hiring managers would partner up with the recruiting organization, with talent acquisition. But instead, there's a push-pull, love-hate type of relationship that happens a lot of times. And so we want to focus on those aspects of it. And so just for watching this episode, I'm going to give you a free gift, a tool called the 10 types of interview questions. And you as a recruiter can pass this along to your hiring manager, and it'll really help them out to really optimize that interview candidate experience so that they can make effective hiring decisions. So let's get into it. Let's open up Pandora's box. Okay, so what makes a good hiring manager? And like we said, there are a lot of good managers. And if you've been a recruiter that has had the privilege and the honor to work with an exceptional hiring manager, wow, does that make your job that much more enjoyable and rewarding? And so ultimately, what is that? What is it about that hiring manager that makes them so good? A big piece of it has to be the experience factor, right? Because through experience, they've been able to make a lot of hires throughout their career. And so once you kind of get that hiring cycle moving and you've gone through the trials and the ups and downs that recruiters go through, that makes them that much more effective. Because remember, on the flip side to it, there's a lot of hiring managers who have actually been burned and are tainted by recruiters. Because just like we experience bad and ugly hiring managers actually experience bad and ugly recruiter experiences as well. So sometimes they might be guarded themselves, but ultimately a good hiring manager is going to be fully invested in the partnership and the collaboration with talent acquisition, with recruiting. That means they understand the challenges, the pitfalls, they understand how to sell and market opportunities to the candidates that they're trying to target. So they really do try to partner up with the recruiters when it comes to that. They're also going to be very knowledgeable and educated when it comes to the internal infrastructure of the organization's recruiting machine. So meaning they understand the recruiting life cycle process. They understand those pieces that come along with it. They understand all the tools, all the infrastructure pieces that come along with it, whether it's opportunities or challenges or limitations that are out there, they're very much aware. So, but when we look at a good hiring manager, there are 4 levels of that really kind of make a good hiring manager. And if we were to break it down, I would say that we would break it down at a base, intermediate, advanced, and a SME level. So a base level, good hiring manager, they're going to immediately, when a requisition opens up, they're going to go and look at the internal assets. And that's happened a lot of times where a position opens up, and as soon as it opens up, the hiring manager says, hey, I've already found somebody internally. This person's available. This person was at risk. I've already talked to this hiring manager. Just go ahead and go through your screening process and make that hire. Those are great. When that happens, those are gimmies for recruiting. So that's a baseline, a base level of a good hiring manager. The next level is the intermediate level for a good hiring manager. And that's really when they expand to their network. So they go outside of the organization and they activate their network, meaning they reach out to their peers and their colleagues and they put feelers out there and they ask around, who do you know? I have a position. So they're networking the opportunity. They're not just depending on recruiting to be the end all be all for everything. They're actually actively engaged. And whenever you have a hiring manager that says, I don't have time to do this, I'm bogged down, then they haven't set that priority. That's why they're not an effective good hiring manager. But a good hiring manager at this level will activate that network. The next level would be kind of what we call that, sort of advanced level of becoming a good hiring manager. And at that advanced level, now they're really rolling up their sleeves and they're getting into the trenches because they haven't been able to identify somebody for the position yet. The position's been open now for quite some time, but they're going to be a little bit proactive now. Now they're going to engage with the recruiter. They're going to provide competitors list, companies to target, profiles to look at. There's been managers where I know I've personally worked with managers where we do actually a sourcing session. We actually get together and do a sourcing session. And that is highly effective on that end. When they can kind of roll up their sleeves and get into it, that's amazing. Or they do virtual introductions both ways. A recruiter might make a virtual introduction to a candidate saying, hey, here's a manager that is interested in speaking with you. Or a hiring manager says, hey, I'm interested in speaking with you. Talk to my recruiter, right? That's a give-take type of relationship. That's some advanced level management right there. And then finally, that fourth level of being a good hiring manager is that subject matter expert level, that SME level. And ultimately what that comes down to is a manager, a hiring manager that is so dialed in and has really invested and has nurtured and has built a strong relationship with the customer. Because when that hiring manager has a good relationship with the customer, they can influence that customer in a lot of ways. So whenever challenges arise, whenever there are difficulties in filling a position, maybe you need to make a hiring decision because, and it's, the skill set only has 90% or 80%. A good hiring manager will know how to negotiate, these kind of hires to happen, or they'll be able to flush out and reset expectations on the requisition, on the needs. And they're constantly probing, and they're asking for a little bit more flexibility, because ultimately recruiters are looking for flexibility when it comes to the job requirements so they can find the talent that they need to. And a good manager understands that. And so they're going to go back and talk to that customer or talk to their leadership and go ahead and try to loosen up some of those requirements. But ultimately, these are the levels of what makes a good hiring manager. They're a pleasure to work with, and there's a lot of takeaways here, but ultimately, it's up to organizations and companies to invest in managers, hiring managers, to equip them so that they have that recruiting mindset, that they can put on that recruiting hat and be effective in their role. Okay, the bad hiring manager, the big bad wolf, right? So let's get into that. Let's just pull off the Band-Aid and let's get into it. What makes a bad hiring manager? Usually the first thing is that they're probably overextended in their role, meaning remember, you get called up to the majors whenever there's a position and a hiring need, and your full-time job is actually not being a hiring manager. Remember, it's a temporary job title that they've received. And so a lot of times they just don't have the bandwidth. They're spread so thin, they're stretched out, that they don't have the bandwidth and the attention that they need to give to recruiting to really understand those nuances. Now that's kind of me, again, giving them a pass, because you do have a lot of those. Or you have hiring managers that are bad because they just don't have the experience. They haven't really engaged and worked with recruiters. Again, maybe they've been burned by recruiters as well, but ultimately they just haven't made as many hires throughout the years, or maybe they only make a couple hires a year, 2-3 hires a year versus dozens and dozens of hires, right? So it really kind of depends too on where they are in their career, how long they've been with the company. So those are the ones that we're kind of given pass to. You can still classify them as bad hiring managers, but they're just ineffective because there's some certain limitations that might be beyond their control. But ultimately, a bad hiring manager is going to be somebody that does not partner, does not collaborate with recruiters. And so they have unrealistic expectations. They depend on the recruiters to do everything, or even for that matter, they don't even know what recruiting does. They just think that it's this magical machine that produces talent and makes hires. And so they don't get involved. Or how about that hiring manager that says, yeah, I'm working with human resources, with HR. They actually think that recruiting is HR. Now, if you're a hiring manager that still does not recognize that recruiting and HR are two separate entities, then you're really lost. Because you have to understand that there's a whole entire portfolio when it comes to the recruiting process, the methodologies, and everything that has to unfold on that basis. But a lot of times they deliver, really bad, mediocre, average, below average job descriptions, right? They're not in tune with the customer. So they're really an order taker, haven't really been able to flush out the specs of what they really need, or don't even know what they need. For that matter. They're not logistically inclined, meaning they can't ensemble a supporting cast of managers or other employees that can help with the interview or the recruiting process as well. They're inconsistent, but because their bandwidth is tight, they're non-responsive, or they're delayed in giving you feedback if you submit somebody, or they give you the best is whenever you submit a candidate as a recruiter, and they give you the 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 word answer, right? Not a fit, not good. Expand on that. Take time off your lazy tail and give me a reason, an explanation on why that candidate is not a good fit for that position. Take the time to do that. And hiring managers that are in that bad label, they're not going to be able to do that. They just don't know that by them giving you direction and guidance, and the more that they're able to do, that helps you fine tune and enhance your search efforts. So they're completely unplugged. They're disengaged. They don't show up to meetings. They don't accept accountability. They're not coachable. And so how do you address this? So we don't want to just we don't want to pile on the bad managers here, because there are situations here that as a recruiter, especially as a top 1% recruiter, you do have an opportunity to coach them up, to put together a learning series, to put together a working session, a briefing of some kind that can tackle kind of these elements. Hey, how do you write job descriptions? Or, hey, this is what we do as a recruiting organization. This is the access that we have as far as the tools. This is how we're doing behind the scenes. When we deliver a candidate for you to review, there's a lot of legwork that happened behind the scenes behind that. And they may not know that. And so a lot of times you as a top 1% recruiter must educate that bad hiring manager so that they can start leveling up their skill, their experience, their expectations of it. And if you do that and you spend the time focusing on that, instead of bad mouthing them or gossiping or just being frustrated with them, it takes a lot of patience. And so there are some managers that do want to turn it around. They've never had the proper training, because a lot of companies just don't invest in hiring managers to have that recruiting mindset. And it takes you as a top 1% recruiter, that mindset, to be able to do that. Hey, top 1% recruiters, taking a quick time out of this episode. I want to first of all thank you for subscribing to this channel. If you haven't already done so, please do. Thank you for being part of this community, the top 1%ers. It's all about mindset, motivation, and the mastery of skill. I want to invite you into my signature course to take a look at it. It's called the 10 Foundations of Recruiting. It's where I take my 30 years of professional experience within talent acquisition, and I bundle it up into just over 10 hours of training and and development. If you're a recruiter that's just starting out, you have a few years under your belt, or you're a seasoned recruiter and you never received the proper training and development and mentoring that you deserve at a top 1% level, you're going to want to go ahead and take a look at this course. It's time for you to invest in your talent, your skills, and your craft. The 10 foundations of recruiting. You won't be disappointed. Now back to the episode. So what is an ugly hiring manager? Okay, let's cue up the horror music here. I want to preface this by saying that in no way are we talking about visual appearances of a hiring manager at all. What we're talking about is that the reality in corporate America, there are companies that hire managers that get elevated into this hiring manager role, and there's a high level of incompetency that takes place. And we want to cover that. And so I would also say that there is a very small percentage of hiring managers that would fall under this category. I say the most of your hiring managers are going to be great, good, above average, slightly below average, and then, terrible and bad, and then really this kind, the ugly kind. And the ugly kind means that they are putting the company at risk. There's a lot of litigation or lawsuits that come out of this. But really, as recruiters, we're going to have to deal with all kinds of personalities when it comes to dealing with hiring managers. And so it's important to recognize when you're engaging in interacting with a hiring manager that really is unprofessional and should not be in the role that they're in. And so a lot of times what happens is it almost feels like there is a personal vendetta against a recruiting team or organization or an individual when it comes to dealing with ugly hiring managers. I'm sorry, I keep laughing every time I say ugly, but and the reason why is it's a lot of times it's like you get thrown under the bus for no reason, right? Or you're the scapegoat. We always hear that recruiting's a scapegoat, and they're always looking to point the fingers at recruiting. Well, recruiting didn't do this, they didn't provide this, or they'll publicly call you out. If you've been a recruiter that's been called out by a hiring manager in a team meeting, on a Zoom call, right? They've got a target, you got a bullseye on your back. And so that's why as a top 1% recruiter, you have to be transparent, you have to be equipped, you have to be proactive, and you have to be, extremely high performance based whenever you're dealing with a challenging hiring manager in this magnitude. But at the end of the day, there's a whole set of incompetencies that they carry with them. And so a lot of it could just be experience or just egotistical, all of those facts. We're not going to get into the psyche of what makes an ugly hiring manager, but they're just not engaged. They're not connected with the company's mission and values when it comes to respecting their peers and their colleagues. They're demeaning. And so, a lot of times recruiters have to deal with that, but in no way, you as a recruiter do not need to deal with any kind of level of harassment or even bullying. There are hiring managers that are very ugly because they bully recruiters. And recruiters, a lot of times have to kind of defend themselves, or they take the high road because their job matters and they don't want to put it at risk. But they're also just in every part of the recruiting sort of factor, they're limited on their ability to, understand the customer, communicate effectively. They'll ghost you. They don't show up to your meetings. They don't have the right team around them. So logistically, they're a nightmare to deal with. They don't have the supporting cast to make good hiring decisions. And so a lot of times, you always hear that saying that employees don't leave good companies. They leave. The reason why they leave because of bad hiring managers, bad managers that they report to. And so ultimately, you may have a hiring manager that 30 days, 60 days, 90 days later, they can't even get a new hire, make it through the probationary period. And recruiters are very aware. We're very sensitive to this, to these pieces here of a hiring manager that just doesn't have it together. And again, is always going to be pointing the finger at you. But also one thing to recognize, and this is kind of the deal breaker here. This is the bottom line. This is you as a top 1% recruiter. must really protect the integrity of the organization, of the company, the client that you're working with. And when a hiring manager crosses the line of being biased or discriminatory towards a candidate, you have the responsibility to recognize it and to report it. And it can't be like, well, did he or did she, not that sort of thing. Whenever there's bias and discriminatory, the U.S. labor laws protect candidates from these types of situations and scenarios. Now, whether it's done on an unconscious or conscious bias situation, there's a lot of training. A lot of companies are providing that type of training to managers. So there's a lot more awareness today than there was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago for that matter. And so that's what makes an ugly hiring manager. And yeah, you can throw all the other things around it, but it's a snowball effect. And so it's unfortunate. It becomes a difficult situation. But ultimately, as a top 1% recruiter, as a recruiter that has a mindset of overcoming challenges and barriers like this, it's going to be up to you to kind of make sure that you provide a process, a way to kind of get to a breakthrough, because it can happen. And that's going to mean having tough conversations, being politically correct, navigating through it, maybe having a mediator, but also sharing information, having briefings and discussions on best practices. And again, a ugly hiring manager is going to push back in so many different ways. It's not only going to give you verbal miscues, but nonverbal miscues as well. And it's your job to weather that storm and deal with it the best that you can. So there you have it, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to hiring managers. And again, I want to leave you with this free gift, this tool, the 10 types of interview questions that hiring managers can use with candidates. And it's really good because it's a framework of basically two structured pieces. It's the structured interview questions and then sort of the competency-based interview questions. And so if you pass that along to your hiring manager, they're going to be able to use it as a reference tool, and it's going to really, again, equip them so that they can be optimal when it comes to their interview experience that they're going to have with the candidates and making good and excellent hiring decisions. Thank you for joining me on this episode. Until next time, remember, top 1%ers, we always level up.